Okay, should we start? Okay, where were we? So, going back to our now very infamous and almost, irritating diagram, we are at the management side. When we started after the break, we talked about the introduction to project management, and we did a case study on planning and assessment. Earlier this week, we did the initiating portion of things where we are doing program design right now. So very quickly to recap, when we talked about introduction to project management, we reviewed our class, we came up with some lessons learned. And what we did was we tried to come up with the contextual framework for how we can learn or teach this class. And one of the things I shared with you is that, in project management, the project management life cycle way is usually the way that instructors teach the class. But, this is a Google of project management life cycle. You can see that they all have so many different types of framework. But I think one of the things that we agreed on was that, forget about the actual terminology, just think about it in terms of the steps of implementation. Then we went on to tie in the project management life cycle with the themes that we have identified as lessons learned from the first lesson. And we had this game, brainstorming game, where we plugged in the issues that you've identified and realized that a lot of these issues should be addressed, particularly at the planning and initiating side of things. And so what we did was, in the planning side, we've zoomed in. Well, first and foremost, we came to the conclusion that planning is a huge endeavor, depending on how wide or how narrow we want to describe the scope, and depending also on your donors. Some of them require you to have a feasibility study, a business plan, a strategic plan, a business model, et cetera, What we did was we zoomed in on one very generally accepted tool within the international development industry, which is the needs assessment. So what we did was we looked at the steps of what a needs assessment looked like: planning and methodology design, data collection, analysis, possible solutions, and then recommending the ICT solution. And so this is step one, and then from here, your planning document generally informs your project design, i.e. your project proposal, which is what we are doing today. So with that, in the planning last week, what we did was we zoomed into the methodology design using Rachita's agri-tool case. And so what we figured out is that there are a whole, based on the readings, there's a whole ton of tools that you can use for gathering data collection, for analysis, and for troubleshooting. What we did was we used a fairly simple framework to look at the 3 levels of data that should be collected. What are some of the questions that we need to answer? What are some of the sources of data? And from a very pragmatic point of view, for example, one of the things we decided was for government data, sometimes the best thing to do is just walk in and buy somebody a cup of tea or beer. How do you collect it? And what are some of the tools to analyze? And then we collectively came up with an exercise, the round-robin exercise, where we brainstormed on a series of challenges and proposed solution that we did together, which I think in the last session, Rachita said was fairly useful. And so what we did in the last class was using, from the needs assessment, we've moved on to the second phase of the project life cycle. I am just calling it initiating, and within that broad umbrella, in the international development world, proposal development is a huge thing. If you've read the readings, you'll find that, there's a ton of different ways to actually write a proposal and organize it so that you could actually submit it to a donor. Most times you will find that if you're responding to a donor, they would already have their own template of how they want you to fill in the blanks, as those of you who have submitted to the DIL process would know. But in general, these are just 2 frameworks that we talked about. The logical framework that we've we've used. And this is a general approach that is fairly acceptable. And in fact, if you look at different permutations and combinations of your requests for proposals, you'll find that they somehow fall into this kind of gamut. In comparison, if you look at this part, does anybody know what this framework, where this framework comes from? The PMI, what is PMI and what is this, PMI, what is that PMI block? Any idea? No? So this part of things actually comes from the IT side. For those of you in the IT industry, you'll know that PMI is an institute, it's a nonprofit. It's been set up to predominantly deal with IT and specifically software development. And so, there's a whole bunch of steps and standards and things like that. If you look at their website, they even do a certification program. If you say that, I'm a PMI certified, it's sort of prestigious, but it's very IT focused. So you can see that the way that they kind of break down their different subtitles are very IT centric. So what is this? How is this relevant to us? You see that within international development, this is sort of the standard template in some ways for proposal development. In our case, in ICTD, we have this weird IT side of things too. How do we mash the two together? Usually, we've seen both types in industry. Sometimes you just get a full IT requirement analysis type proposal that lands on my desk when I was looking at the foundation. But then from what we've talked about, that's not necessarily a good first step proposal, because you're assuming that your solution is IT-based and all your needs assessment is very much IT-centric. What about all the other lessons learned? And as we've talked about, the lessons learned, about 95% of them, if not 99% of them, are not IT-related. It's all contextual. Who are your stakeholders? What are the politics, etc. So just know that this is sort of again, one of the schizophrenic nature of the ICTD industry. Still, however, for our purposes, in the last class, we use the typical sort of log framework to do an analysis. Now, this is what your proposal and I'm looking. What we did in class was using the case study, which is the needs assessment, we drilled down on the log frame for the objectives all the way through the activities. So, having said that, what did it look like? So a log frame matrix is, as we've explained, is one of many different tools for designing a project, and this is also where most of the time your monitoring and evaluation falls within. And for the usual suspect donors, this is sort of the default mode. Again, as in the last class, I've mentioned that there's a lot of debates about what you should be using. There's a lot of people that really absolutely hate log frames, and after doing this for 17 years, I am beginning to too. Actually I do. And for those of us who actually went through the process of applying our case to the log frame, you get a sense of why it's so annoying, because you're really dissecting things very, very thinly. You're trying to make things sensible, but sometimes too sensible, so that you're really restrained. So what happened was that we looked at the lab. Hopefully you have read the case study too, because that's what we're also going to do today. And then the few of us, thank you, the 5 people who came to class on Monday. I know that it's so stressful because there's nobody else to show the participation. But if we looked at what we did, excuse me. Oh, I can't click this. Okay, where's SSL? Hey, I can't find it now, Antonin. What happened to my... Okay. Well, thankfully, I did this. So this is sort of lifted from our framework that we did. I don't know if you managed to read it, but have you read more or less the case? Because we are going to use this case study to continue today with developing our work plan, our budget, and then our human resource matrix. Yep. So what we did was we, looking at the lab in South African case, that's a typical needs assessment, pretty detailed. And in fact, a lot of the answers are already there because it's well written in the sense that it gives you the recommendations that would fall very nicely into your goals, your activities, etc. What we did with the case study was we plugged out one out of the 5 subcomponents. They talked about different sub-areas. Anybody remember what the 5 sub-areas are? Well, anybody know, tell me what the goal was for that case.
Improved education research.
Education research was one of the 5. What was the overriding goal that we talked about?
Like facilitating hours and access to education.
Yep, access to education and knowledge, right? So we said that this is the highest level goal, one of many that they were evaluating in the needs assessment. And within these, what were the 5 things that they broke down? What were the 5 sub goals or sub-levels of activities?
Improved libraries.
The educational research, which was what you were saying,
Yeah.
right? One of which was improve the libraries. What were some of the rest?
School management, teacher training.
Teacher training. Keep going.
School management.
Okay. Teacher training. Yep, management. Right, and coordination. And then there's this last thing about, changing behavior with regards to development initiatives, which is a very typical problem in the real world too. We're not going to deal with this one. So what we did in the last class was we picked one of this for simplicity to try to plug it into that framework. What I would love for us to do today is actually to try to complete this very quickly as a group, because there was just, 6 of us, and those were some of the things we came up with. But what I wanted you to do, well, even before that, I want to make sure that all of you understand the log frame so that we can actually apply it to the activities. Are there any questions that you have about the logical framework, et cetera, that I should address before we go into the exercise? No? Which means that everybody is very clear. Yeah?
So I've done result chains in a separate class, which I think
Yep.
are pretty closely related.
Mm-hmm.
But they divide out expected short-term outcomes, well, like indicators of the project is being implemented, and then indicators that you expect to see quickly, and then indicators that you might see longer term.
Yep.
And I wondered if there was a similar division.
Very painful, results chain. Yeah, a results chain is sort of like the new kid on the block, where they say, well, a log frame is way too rigid because it's in a table. So let's have flow charts, right? I mean, actually that's a simple way of saying why they came up with that. It's actually a criticism of the log frame. And so what they did was they came up with these, things that they call results chain, which is kind of like a log frame, but they are trying to make it a little bit more sophisticated. And there's still no agreement about what that might look like. I know maybe you might have learned one particular template. And that's the danger, because you go out and then somebody says, okay, draw me a results chain. And this reminds me of one of my last project when I was in Uganda and was working, doing a proposal for the EU. And the EU now is using results chain as opposed to log frame. But know that it's still a logical thing, right? They're trying to show how A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, so that you achieve your goals. But the annoying thing was there was no agreement about what a result chain really, what framework they were really using. So one of the hard things was coming up with something that people would accept. It went around 7 rounds of reiteration, and then they finally figured out that there was no agreement within the particular organization that was funding in Uganda on behalf of the EU. And so, of course, they did the best thing they could, right? And I say this very sarcastically. They hired some young consultants to come and design a results chain framework for them. And based on that, I almost vomited blood. But all this to say, yes, it is one of the other tools outside. There are other things that are called mind maps, there are things that are like logical flow. So just know that it's just a way that donors donors want to keep us accountable. In the private world, it's pretty easy. If I'm a VC, I would just say, okay, every 6 months or every 3 months, I want you to show me your profit and loss statement, right? But in the international development world, nonprofit world, there isn't such a bottom line, or at least that bottom line doesn't really matter much to donors. So they come up with all these different frameworks, each of them slightly different, each of the language, even a log frame, each of them uses different languages to try to keep you accountable. So the moment you end up doing a log frame, you are sometimes locked into it, right? I mean, it's a log frame, but you're locked into it because what it means is that, okay, you're saying this is how you're going to measure. And so when you're actually doing your monitoring and final evaluation, you are sort of locked into these activities, these methods, and things like that. Does that make sense? It's just a long way of saying there are all kinds of things out there. Some good, some bad, but yeah. Anything to add? Did I miss anything about the results chain?
Well, so I'm just wondering, because results chain, though I don't know all of its different forms, has kind of a recognition of long-term versus short-term outcomes, and I wondered what would be kind of the equivalent in...
I don't even know if I don't even know if a results chain necessarily has long and short term. It depends on the donor itself. Like this is a results chain that has, again, you see that it is, if I could open this, right? You see that it's kind of the same thing, input, output, outcome, impact, right? So instead of saying, okay, now you're confined into 4 columns and 3 grids, 3 rows, now you have a little bit more leeway to show the flow of the story. So I think the long and short term thing is probably one particular way to do a results chain. Yeah, but that's very similar. Okay, any other questions on the log frame, etc., etc.? Okay, if not, then this is what I want us to do. Can you break into, let's see, groups of 2? And what we're going to do is you're going to plug this in very quickly together. We're going to do our cluster exercise again, if I can find my whatever. Can you guys see this? No, right? Is this better? No?
Is it online somewhere?
Yeah, it was. And then, after Antonin and me and Tara met, something strange happened. Let's see. Actually, you know what? It might be here. Okay. So this was as far as we went because we did not have the power of collaboration and crowdsourcing, right? So what happened in the last class was that we went through these based on, what do we think is the overall goal and objective? We picked it up from the case study, i.e. access to education and knowledge. We talked about what is the purpose, and we zoomed into this particular subsector. So it is increased access to educational resources. Then next, we plugged in what are some of the possible outputs, and based on the outputs, what are some of the activities that we can have, right? And then what are some of the variable indicators, and how do you verify those indicators? So these things are things that we kind of try to plow away at the last class. But what I actually want us to do is try to think of this, try to come out from a clean slate. Think of this as, okay, that's something that we kind of brainstorm, level 1, some of the things you might or might not agree. So what I would love for you guys to do is to plug in, for each of the, you can pass this down. So what I would love is, I'm going to reproduce this onto the board, and I want you to plug in your proposed indicators, means of verification, verifications and assumptions for each of these things, and as well as if there might be other outputs and additional activities that you would well, not additional, sorry, let me backtrack. I want you to write down your own outputs as well as activities. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna map this. Am I clear in the instructions? You don't have to. Because what we're doing is we're gonna start from scratch, and all you need to know is that framework.
Yeah, I can't see the plans, it's too small. I can't see.
Yeah, I know, I'm gonna show you the framework. This one, can you see this? You cannot see this? Okay, now how about move to the front? Instead of Muhammad coming to the mountain, instead of mountain going to Muhammad. Let me see, from current slide. Right, so yeah, is this better?
Yeah.
So basically, we're starting the overall object. So what we're doing is we're behind the case. We're basically doing what we did in the last class, but in a quick kind of brain dump kind of exercise. So, and what we're going to do is we're going to start pasting your thoughts into a framework that I will write down onto the board. Okay, let's see, 2, 4, 6. Yeah, I think two is good. Maybe we might have, yeah, okay. Got it? We're not doing this part of input, okay? So just 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, well, before you go back, right, let's just cluster around for a little bit, because what we're going to do is we're going to actually try to organize things and see what are some of the recurring themes. I like that honest reporting. Okay, everybody is ready, right? Okay, so as we look through this, what I would love for you to do is to try to organize it. See, the exercise shows you how conflicting a log frame can be, because it depends on how you describe it.
Yeah.
In the last class, we talked about, one of the things we talked about was, applying it to our own life, right? A, B, C, D. And if our overriding goal is happiness, right? How do we be happy, which is your overall objective? And this is how we define it. And we'll say, well, okay, money could be one of your outcomes. Get it? But whereas if you define money as your end goal, then this whole chain would look very different. So herein is the inherent contradiction in log frames. Okay. Got it? Okay, let's take a stab. Right? Let's all go towards the board and let's try to organize things. Just move things up and down.
I'm going to do this.
No, started with that and we ended up with that.
Exactly.
This could be focused and
Right. So one of that's great to know, because as you write your log frame and design your project, one of the key things is you need to figure out what this is. And a lot of the times the trick is just look towards your donors. It's a dirty trick, but unfortunately they're funding you, then that's what you would say, well, if they think that money is your overall objective, you write that. If you think that they're more evolved than that and they think they want happiness, you write that. For the purposes of us, what we did, my suggestion was take the overall objective as, where was the other one? It wasn't here, right? As increase in education, access to knowledge and access to education and knowledge. So we'll take that as the objective, and then we will take this as increased access to education resources. Right? So this gives us some kind of a framework. Can you help organize? So the top level objective is access to education and knowledge. Everything else falls under. Okay, and then this group, would you organize the activities, cluster the activities, and then you guys can do this part. Put like activities together and like indicators together. Still confusing? Totally?
Well, you said access to education and
Yeah.
knowledge, and then increase access to education.
Yeah,
So
and-
shouldn't the overall objective be equitable access or
I just-
access to it seems like very normative.
Yeah, I mean, it seems normative. A lot of people would argue, you know, is access, should that even be a goal? If you give them access, but they're actually not, you know, increasing, right, educational quality and knowledge.
Right.
So we can argue that to death. For the purposes of this exercises, we're just lifting the goals that they stated in the case. But you're right, Eric, I mean, and we will discuss this.
Okay.
Yeah, but for now, let's just
I see.
organize these things.
Okay.
Okay, how are the activities people doing?
I'm confused about the difference between indicator and identification. It seems like that's indicators.
No, so the indicator is satisfaction, and the way you would pick up the satisfaction is the survey. And the indicator is attendance, and the way you collect is that data is through logs. Okay, that's what I thought.
Are we good?
What would you usually put in results?
Sounds.
Yeah?
See, you're like higher attendance, and this could easily go in objective or purpose also, right?
Or indicators also. I was thinking of numerical indicators because higher is like higher than what, and then it's like a quantifiable number that means it's
Yeah.
an indicator.
Right. So yes, so take this exercise for these things, right? Because as you are trying to plug things into a log frame, you realize that it is sort of trying to fit things into a way that this totally makes sense. That doesn't make sense, that we try to just put some sense into that. So, okay, tell me again, what was the issue? Which was the
So like
issue?
the high attendance was in the results section,
Mhm.
and like I don't know if this is it could be purpose or objective.
Right. So you see where the logical is. What would this result bring about? Yeah, where does it come from? I guess increased student learning? Yeah?
It's also based on the assumption that if students like learning, they will attend school.
Okay, fine. Let's just force it in there.
So this then stays here, right?
Okay.
No, it should go to indicators.
Okay, fine, move it.
Yeah.
That's why it's weird because to me, a lot of the times the indicators are actually kind of the activities. The result, you know, the indicators for the results are actually the activities. But it's a very, very sort of dicing things in.
Well, the result can be higher attendance, and the indicator is like 95% of the students show up for class, right?
Yeah, the indicator is
The
attendance.
indicator
It's more
is-
accurate.
Yeah.
Like, what does it mean by higher attendance? Well, you have an indicator for that, and then you verify that with with the attendance sheets at the school.
Agreed. So then here it will be attendance, and here will be high attendance. But my question actually is, why is higher attendance in result and not in purpose?
Because there are layers of abstraction, right? It depends on what layer of abstraction you're starting at with your objective, and you get the purpose then fulfills that objective, and the results like are enable the purpose to be fulfilled. And so I think there's a greater value than just attendance.
Yeah, I think attendance is a tricky one because you could also have the objective of increasing attendance just start out with that. So
It could be a result, it would be a goal that you might bring about by an activity like a truancy officer, right? If your activity is going to be higher truancy officers, then the result you're hoping for is higher attendance. The indicator of higher attendance would be a change in your attendance from something to something bigger. And then your purpose would be based on the assumption that higher attendance leads to better learning. And better
'Cause-
learning, maybe your overall objective
Sure.
would be a better.
The reason I'm confused is because even then, like student learning can easily go in results because that's a result that you would want to generate from the activities, and that goes into your objective. So I think even if you put attendance and results, then even student learning should be a result.
Okay,
that
well,
you're
let's
going
put
for.
that. Okay, so one of the tricks, and the honest thing is that, so you can see, right, why I just have this, like, it's very, it's hard. It's dissecting things over and over again. One of the things I've learned in practice is that the more stuff you put up there, like the more goals, the harder it is to measure, the more it looks like you have failed to your donor. Because your higher level goals are always sort of iffy to measure. Your lower level goals are easier, right? So the way that I tend to do it is I would keep it really, really simple. One overall objective, if possible, just one purpose. So, okay, let's say if we move this down, increase student learning, where are your indicators? Where are your corresponding indicators? Okay, increase access. Okay, this is the same thing, right? Okay, cool. Any other issues? What are some of the themes? So can someone summarize what are the major results right now and what are the indicators to measure it?
Access and student and teacher knowledge.
Okay. And one of the things too, sorry to interrupt. One of the things too is that, Eric had a good point. It's sometimes the language matters, because you're saying this is increased access to education resources. Your result, would be what? Increasing access to books, right? Which is sort of a very sort of minute dissection of one of those things, and then from here you can say, okay, a sub-result might be increased access to math books, increased access to science books. Where do you actually draw that line? And that's why I always say it's as much a science as it is an art. So take this with a pinch of salt, but just know that most of the time, what you want to know is that this is standard practice. Look back at your donor documents. What do they believe in? What do they like? And then start plugging in things that are measurable. That's usually the trick to program management. You just plug in things that are incredibly measurable so that when you actually measure it, your donors will say, okay, good job. Please go ahead. So one of the things is access to books. Sorry, Krista, you was presenting.
I was just answering the question.
Yeah, I'm still asking it. So summarize for me, what are the results and what are the indicators, means of verifications and assumptions?
So we don't actually have anything up there that's directly an indicator of increased access to books. I guess the indicator I want would be a number of books.
Number of books, right? Yeah, and it means a verification, count books, right? Or book inventory or whatever. Okay, what are some 2 or 3 more results? And then let's go to activities.
So increased student learning is associated with student performance as an indicator, which would be gathered through student test scores.
Okay, good.
And
That's logical.
assumption would be that those test scores are available and obviously recorded.
Yeah, nobody's cheating, right? So,
Question.
Uh-huh.
Why can't we just do swim lanes for each objective or each task?
why can you what?
Like a swim lane or like maybe I don't know, interaction flow or something of that sort, like how the information is going to flow. Because for me, this exercise while we were organizing the information, we ended up moving things around and then I'm still a little bit confused.
You should be, because the log frames are like that, right? Because when your donor gets the document, then this is what they're going to say. Well, these people don't really know what they're talking about because this is actually a means of verification that they are putting into a goal. Somebody else will say, no, I don't think so. I actually think that this is a goal. It's like that. You would always have that, and that's what the exercise is for. It's for you to know that things can fit in a lot of.
So we
colors.
present this whole deliverable, this as a deliverable, or like what would be the takeaway, and then just present the key findings from this table, like after we do this exercise?
You mean in your document?
Yeah.
Well, in your document, you would actually, most of this is a brainstorming exercise, right? So if we were in a project and this is a group and we're like, okay, what do we want to do? At some point, somebody would need to clean this up. So what you would want to do is something that is really, really clear. You have results, one, and depending, okay, if this is a $50,000 proposal, this is fine. But if this is $1 million proposal, your donors would expect result 1, you know, this, right? Increase access to books, and then 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. What are some of the results, and then what are some of the measurable indicators? So they really want you to drill down because they want to make sure that, yes, you spent $1 million on these things. So, but, you know, for $50,000, that's fine. So results 2, results 3. Then what you want to do is, okay, then how do I measure my indicator? Number 1, 1.1, 1.2. You get what I mean? So this is how you would actually present it. And this is exactly how you're going to monitor it. Because
Also, there will be always that like key index which will tie to 2 rows, whatever, 2 entries in the same row. Right?
yes, it won't be all like that. One result would so this, you know, this is one result, this is another result, this is another result, this is another result, right? Then you would have your actual indicators going to them. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's not a whole chunk together. Got it? Okay. Any other question on this part? Okay, then let's talk about the activities. Somebody summarize for me, what are the major activities that you guys have come up with? Looks pretty sophisticated. So is this 4 activities we're looking at?
I think 6.
6, build a library, do a teacher training workshop. Are these the same things? Purchase high band internet connection?
No, these are different. They're all separate.
Oh, they're all separate, okay. Provide transportation.
Educational websites.
Okay, so can somebody summarize for me very quickly what belongs to what? Just high-level summary.
So what goal?
Yeah.
Just start reading.
Yeah. Well, tell me what are the major activities? Are all these separate activities?
I don't know about this one if you want because I wrote this one.
What is the
So-
IQMS experience?
So there was this whole challenge related to the whole IQMS system that they had.
Yeah.
So the goal, the activity was to improve the IQMS experience.
Right.
And then you would monitor the number of hours teachers spend in training for IQMS workshops.
Okay.
You would also monitor the number of times they attended meetings for
Okay.
that and the number of paper forms teachers have to fill.
Okay.
We also have a side goal of measuring the hours spent in teaching, which tells you that they are spending less time in admin work. So
Okay.
these go in hand in hand.
Okay.
So and the way you would do that is keeping track of workshops attended by teachers through timesheets and to manually count the number of forms that teachers are submitting.
Okay.
And we did
Wait, perfect. So basically this is, so instead of an objective, right, you can list it in an activity, language. You know, I don't know how, like, redesign, you know, interface or something, and then this is how you're gonna indicate.
Yeah.
Did everybody get that?
Yeah.
Right? The thing about this is that don't worry, as all our cases, don't worry about the details. What you want to do is to get that logic flow, you know, when you write proposals for your own projects. And know that, you know, the dissecting is very, very thin. Okay, somebody who did another activity, tell us what is your logic flow. Who did build library? Built library?
It's maybe me.
So what's your indicator?
I don't have time to write any.
Okay, what does everybody think? Built library, you know, an indicator would be existence of a library, right? Or indicator would be, you know, square footage increased by, you know, X%.
Sorry.
And then your means of verification would be like a site visit or, you know, operational documents, right? And your assumption is, okay, there's enough land available and there's a demand for a library, assuming people know how to do a library. Okay, something else? Okay, what about this purchase high bandwidth internet connection?
Okay. So I wasn't writing indicators for that, but I think, yeah, I mean, for this one, shortcuts to educational websites.
Okay.
And number.
What do you mean by shortcuts? Like create shortcuts? Like create
Yeah, so it wasn't just, so you have access to the internet as a result, but then you have activities to like enable, educational experiences on the internet.
Right,
One of those
like create a
things is-
portal.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And so then it was like indicators are like. number-
Presence of a portal.
Yeah, or number of those shortcuts or, yeah. or when I
Okay.
checked out the portal.
Number of resources, right?
Yeah.
Means of verification, web page with links, right?
Right.
So it's so simple sometimes, that it's kind of hard, to really drill it down into such detail. Okay, let's do one last one. Okay, provide transportation.
Oh, I read that. Indicator would be
Tell me why provide transportation will lead to, either one of these
the
results that will
result
lead
was
to-
actually the result would be to increase was it?
Higher attendance.
Higher
High attendance,
attendance.
okay, that makes sense.
For the purpose of higher attendance, like you would have the activity to provide transportation, which could be indicated by, I suppose, like the number of students in each classroom compared to before the transportation was available. Means of verification is like the leader of the class could, like the teacher could just take roll.
Yeah, or
And-
your transport law, right?
Yeah,
Right.
or the bus driver.
Yeah, bus
can
schedule,
just-
whatever.
Whatever.
Okay, so are you getting a sense? I want you all to just get a sense of how things belong and not belong and why sometimes it is so hard to actually do a log frame. Okay, any questions on this before we go on to budgets and things like that?
Yeah.
Yep.
So in the actual proposal, since in this needs assessment, we had it in 5 sub-goals. or
Yep.
whatever. So in an actual proposal, you would subdivide it? So
Um,
you have like one of these tables for each goal?
No, they actually want you to put everything into one table.
So teacher training, educational resources, all that would be all in one table?
Yep, and then it becomes a tremendous mess. Yeah, but it would run into like 4 or 5 pages of Excel sheets.
And you would have the results before the activities?
Yes, because the activities lead to the results, lead to the purpose, leads to the goal. Yeah, but it becomes very unruly, messy, ugly. Okay, so any other questions on a log frame? Yep, Krista?
It's kind of related to the same question, but if you put all of those, all 5, that means you intend to do all 5? Like if you just picked out one and it's like, we've identified all of these problems, but the one that we're going to work on is increasing access to resources, specifically book resources, so we're specifically going to build a library, would you then just log?
Right. I want to make sure that did everybody hear that question? Maybe Krista, you can repeat it and I could address it, but that's a great question.
So my question was, if you say you did a needs assessment, you found all of these, but because of the scope of your own organization, you can only tackle part of it. So you're only going to try to address access to information, specifically information from books. So you decide that you're going to build a library. Is that the only part that gets put into the log frame?
Got it. Okay, so you have read the needs assessment, right? And again, the needs assessment had those 6 things, and then the 6 things have been broken down into, various recommendations that can be plugged into a log frame like this, right? And we're only doing one just for the purpose of the case. So the answer is it depends. If you are a project manager running that project and you go, well, here's my needs assessment and I do want to address all these 6, right? Then that's what you would do. It becomes totally unruly. And sometimes people would be like breaking down the purpose and then they would say, okay, refer to sheet number 3 for activities. And then this is refer to sheet number 17, for your indicators. It becomes unruly. So it depends on how it's structured. Sometimes donors might, if I'm running the project, I might go, okay, here the consultant has suggested 6 areas, but I actually think that our management and communications can be combined into one area. And I think that, the initiatives is not as important, right? So this is me as a project manager making that decision. And then when I actually write a proposal, I have taken those things out and I just put in the corresponding things. Does that make sense? But yes, it becomes really, really, really unruly. I want to, maybe I could show you if I could. I mean, this is actually a budget that I want to move on to show you. But if I could if I could find a log frame that I did that is totally unruly. I don't even know when was the last log frame, but for time purposes, let's not do that. But yes, I don't like it, and a lot of people in the industry don't. And you'll also find that when we talk about implementation and M&E, you find that these things really constrain you. Because at some point, you go in and you start implementing, and you go, well, providing transportation, okay, that cannot really work. Because, or, I've actually defined it maybe too narrow. Instead of providing transportation, it should be something else, because maybe the issue is that people don't need transport, they walk, Maybe the solution is to get more shoes, for example, right? I mean, that's a possibility. But you're constrained to measure it by this. And then if you put in an amendment to the log frame, it becomes yet another, sort of bureaucratic issue. Okay, any other questions on this? Okay, next class, I'll show you some of the log frames that I've done, and I'll show you some of the simple ones versus some of the harder ones. So based on this log frame, and coming back to Christina's question, yes, if you write your proposal, this is sort of how it would look like, right? And this thing is a log frame that usually you would plunk into either an appendix if it is unruly, or you would plunk the major things into the main document and say refer to appendix for details. What you would actually do is in the main document, you would actually describe these things. The overall objective is this. You don't have to go into the means of verification and everything, but this is the part that you would need to lay out in the main part of your document. Get it so far? Okay. Any other questions on this before we go into budgeting, work plan, etc.? Okay. So if I were to do this, one of the things that we don't have time today to do is to plot these into a work plan, because within your proposal, your work plan is usually a required template that you need to submit. Usually, either again in the main paper where you summarize the things, or in a detailed work plan. And it depends on how detailed they want it to be. A lot of times they look like this, by quarter. So, for example, you have 7 activities, right? So you would come up with activity 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then you would put a check mark and color the boxes at the quarter. So this is a 3-year project work plan. Do I still have you guys? Yeah? Okay, so this is just put in the check marks. So next, if we were to go to budgets, I wanted to show you, this is a sample budget that not a sample, actually we submitted it to USAID. And it shows you how complicated it is. You could, of course, do a really simple budget, right? And say, okay, so if you look at this thing, okay, this is a 2-year project that has a cost sharing, and this was a proposal that was for what they call the Last Mile Initiative, and it's the setting up of these centers, right? At that point in time, it was like a tele-center, and we're working with a whole bunch of stakeholders in Sri Lanka. So what they call tasks, right, are things that within the paper itself are our activities. Why is it called tasks? Because in the RFP, they said, name your tasks, right, instead of activities. So you can see that in this particular task, we have provision of services and partnering, and then we have number 1. And then task 2, this is 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. Does this make sense in terms of how the logic of how it is laid out, right? So your budget always corresponds to your activities in a very logical sense. And what you would do is you break down certain activities that might be too high level. So for example, task 3, recruit partners with operators, right? So you look at these demarcations of how we actually did it. This is 3.1, 3.2, 3.2 AB. And again, this is, like I said, as much of an art as it is a science. Who is to say that, I need to put in identify and select operators as a subcomponent? Isn't that a given? you know? So, or let's look at, okay, training of operators, which is, right? So if we say, okay, task 4, and you can see, right, task 1 through 4 falls under objective 1. And what they call objective is the purpose that we're doing here. Do you see how different donors have different languages for everything? So if you look at, say, objective, the training of operators, right? IT skills training, business development training, content development training, and they're all cost share in the, actually it's a 1-year project. So, and this is only what is called, your sort of summary of your cost share. And if you look at the program detail, right, this is how, so if you look at how many pages, okay, this is prepared, this is a usual USAID type of budget that you attach with your proposal. And this was only a $600,000 project that we were writing for, so not very sophisticated. Look at how many pages of these things that we actually submitted and the level of detail that is needed. So this is, doing a budget at this size is not something that we usually do on our own. If you were writing a big proposal for a government contractor, you actually have a finance department that does it for you. And that's basically what I just wanted to share, that a budget usually looks like this, right? Where you have the number, the description, the unit, and then sometimes they require you to break it by quarter, depending on how they want you to report, and then there's a total. And in this case, there's a cost share, which means that there's a requirement that our partners fund and spend as much, if not more, than we do. So you can see that, for example, equipment, right? To set up 10 LMR centers, buy a computer, 3 centers, 10 computers each, how much would it be? Electricity and wiring. So that's the kind of detailed budget that's a lot of the more usual suspect donors require you to do. And I know that I'm just brushing by, but this whole budgeting thing, like I said, if you look at your program detail, there's a budget summary, TAF 224, that's sort of like the internal document that you need to tell USAID what are your overheads and what are not your overheads, what's your cost share, so that they can actually come up with some sophisticated matrix to know that you are actually meeting their requirements, and a whole bunch of other forms that they require you to fill. Christina?
I was just wondering, so in practice, when you submit this, is there usually a lot of back and forth on the budget and as well as the that matrix, or is it usually they just accept the?
You mean when you submit it to the donor?
Yeah, or does it depend on how big the grant is?
I think in general, the process is supposed to be streamlined. So if you think about it, right, and I'm talking about this from either a government donor or even a foundation perspective. What you're doing is that you're probably receiving like 10,000, I don't know, maybe like something like this, you might receive 200 grants, and if that's the case, most of the time they're not going to go, oh yeah, I really like this, but I think their budget is wrong. They would probably go, what the hell are they talking about? Okay, they don't know. It's like receiving your resumes, and then there's a lot of blatant sort of not discrimination, but a blatant sieving at that level. However, there are cases where donors will come to you and say, hey, I'm really interested to fund this thing, and I have some extra money lying around. Can you, write me a proposal? No. If that's the case, usually that's called a concept note. And you write them the concept note, and that's when you kind of go back and forth. And it's usually when they accept it at the last, when they say, okay, they think that you're the best in line, they might probably say, okay, I really like this, you're probably going to get it, I just need you to change your personnel because I think you're paying your consultants too much. Right? They might say something like that, but there's not a lot of discussion with your donors. It's usually you send it in and it goes into a black hole. That's what happens in the real world. Any other questions on the budgeting side of things? So as far as you are concerned as a manager, what you would want to do is just make sure that you know how a budget looks like. I.e., again, your activities corresponds, your task corresponds to your narrative, and then you always just break it down into the number of units by quarter, how much was the total. And then, the rest of the stuff is done usually by the finance folks. Okay, I think I want to finish with the budget, and then maybe next lesson we could talk a little bit about the human resource side of things. But again, this is sort of an introductory course. You can do an entire budgeting course by itself. So up to so far, do you have any questions at all about what we have done so far? Or clear? Confusing? Too daunting? Too much budgeting? Eric?
Well, it seems like you have to really figure out how you're going to implement the plan really early on.
Mm-hmm.
And so is there an understanding of adaptation of that plan, and can you weasel that into your budget in some way?
Weasel that.
Well, because you want to be honest, but you also, everybody understands that it's going to change. And so is there just kind of this underlying understanding that, okay, this is your best go at it, and you seem to be, cognizant of the issues, and therefore we're going to grant you this, or do they really are sticklers at what we need?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that's one of the major criticisms about a log frame, because you're so drilled into the level of detail at a point in time that particularly in a sort of a contextual international development situation, that it will change. So a lot of the donors have been pretty much sticklers, because what they do is that this feeds into their own overall objective goals and the way that they measure, and that's how, for example, USAID is accountable to Congress, for example. So they don't like too many changes. A lot of times when we have a major change, maybe if I could say, hey, we're just changing 2 indicators here, is that okay? That's fine. But if you're realizing that, I can't really do 2 major activities because of the changes, then you're required to go through this bureaucratic process of, submitting a form that says amendment, and then it goes through this, do they allow it or do they not? So yeah, that's why building this becomes sort of an art at some point for program managers, because you want to build it in a way that gives yourself enough flexibility. So you won't want to give yourself, activities that are too detailed, like build a library with 17 books and computers. You won't do that. You might say, build a library or libraries depending on needs as they arise, something like that. Yeah. Any other questions on the process of proposal development? No? Okay, then if that's the case, next session we will do human resource, and then we will move on to implementation.